So my name is Hugo, and I'm going to have here a dual role as chair and discussant in this session. And boy, oh boy, we're here for a treat because we're having Professor Li-fang Zhang presenting the core of her very impactful, meaningful career, not only for, in my opinion, for the field of education, but for many different fields, many different sectors, if people read her work carefully. I will start this session by asking our dean, Professor Yang, to start with the welcome remarks. After his remarks, an introduction of Professor Zhang, we will have the lecture delivered to us, and then we're going to have a bit of discussion and Q&A at the end. So having said that,
just a few points, and mainly explain why we have this. And good afternoon, everybody. Who's online and offline, right?
Online and offline.
Yes, that's why. That means I need to speak to a microphone. Who's online and offline? Anyway, so how many people we have online?
You don't really.
So it's only online. Oh, it's only offline.
Still can hear.
Oh, you can still hear. Okay. Welcome to this seminar. A few points I want to say about this seminar. One is Hong Kong U education. This is part of our celebration of our 40th anniversary. But I really want to emphasize injuries here and students here and Jesus, including myself. I often label myself as a scholar of higher education. And this university, as you all know, was created in 1911. And 1911, I want to emphasize the year because that's the earlier days of Asia's modernization. Okay, Asia wanted to learn from Western powers, therefore built new universities. And China's first modern university was Tianjin University. That was in 1895. Okay, and similar age, slightly earlier, was the University of Tokyo. And then the Japanese colonization, including Taiwan, including Korea, and they built imperial universities. Later, these universities became very influential in Asia. So I emphasize this because I want to say Hong Kong U is one of the pioneers. 1911. So Hong Kong U is the same age as Tsinghua. It's actually the same age, only a few months difference. And at that time, Asia started to modernize, industrialize, I should say. Modernization is not always so proper. So we are very proud of this great, knowledge movement from the west to the east. And I also want to emphasize that East Asia is the only really successful region to modernize after European modernization. East Asia is the only one so far most successful, non-Western. Okay, if you look at culture, if you look at social institutions, all these, and Hong Kong U is a part of that. So Hong Kong U really built up itself, established itself as a major institution within this movement. And the reason I say this is increasingly Eastern knowledge is also going to worldwide, okay, not only the West. And Hong Kong U will continue to play a major role. I'm not saying Western knowledge is not moving to Asia, it's still moving to Asia, but increasingly both ways, two-way traffic. So within that movement, Hong Kong U will also play a major role. And that part, you will play a major part, particularly young people, okay? So Hong Kong U will re-establish it, right? Continue to establish itself, continue to be great. And our teacher training, at that time it was called Department for the Training of Teachers in Faculty of Arts in 1917. So only a few years after Hong Kong U was established, we had a Department of Teacher Training within Faculty of Arts. So teacher training actually had a long history in this university. We actually, I inherited this, including you, Mark. I inherited this, now we are celebrating 40s. Actually, we are far more than 40 years, much longer. So teacher training started September 15th, 1917. 107 years, over 107 years already. And because Hong Kong U for a long time was the only university in this society, in this territory, therefore our history is Hong Kong history. So our Chinese education history is Hong Kong U's, is Hong Kong's Chinese education history. To a great extent until other institutions were established. So for a long time, we are very proud of this. So if you look at our Chinese language education, for a long time, we are Hong Kong's history of Chinese language. We train many good teachers, educators in this society. We therefore contribute hugely to Hong Kong's development, modernization. And in 1976, became independent school of education. If you come from Chinese societies, school of education and faculty of education translated exactly the same as 教育学院. I try to figure out, can I differentiate? Actually cannot. In Chinese, we just cannot. It's a 教育学院. So basically, even we should celebrate 47 years rather than 40 years. As I said, I inherited this, from my previous deans. Therefore, actually, I'm not entirely happy with this because we have much longer history. But we now celebrate 40 years anniversary. So we are very modest. I also want to say, people usually ignore our earlier stages. Hong Kong U really had a glorious past. During the Japanese invasion, Hong Kong students and teachers tried very hard, and they try to preserve our library, all these things. We have very glorious history, and many people contribute hugely to China's modernization. We also train great scholars, including Zhu Guangqian. Zhu Guangqian is a graduate. So it's a long. We are proud of history. Okay, let me shift to Li-fang. Just a few words, my own observation as a colleague. Li-fang is, of course, a huge asset to this faculty, to our university, and to the discipline of psychology globally. So we are lucky to have scholars like her in this faculty. And she has been one of the most cited. We are very proud of this. Most cited, even compared to our engineers and scientists, she has been one of the most cited scholars in this university globally. Okay, globally, our university now emphasizes citation so much. So that's why I say Li-fang is a great asset to our faculty. And I also want to emphasize this is important. If you are new academic or if you plan to be an academic, you need to learn more from Li-fang, how she developed her own, how she claimed, how she built, or how she established her own territory. You really need to claim your territory if you want to be an established scholar. Okay, that's not easy. So you need to have your own territory, and you claim this is mine. This is mine. You claim with your power, of course. And Li-fang is a good example. So young people can really learn from how she, why she becomes has so remarkable academic career. It's important for our researchers because not everybody knows how to position, her or himself, it's about how to develop. And this academic work is also to some extent a pecking order. It's not easy to survive, and you need to learn carefully. So I think that with all these, I just want to say we are therefore very proud to have this seminar as part of our celebration of the faculty's establishment. I hope you all enjoy the talk and intellectually entertained by Li-fang's wisdom and charisma. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang, for that very generous introduction. It is truly an honor to be part of this celebration of the 40th anniversary of our faculty. And I would like to, first of all, extend my deep gratitude to Professor Huang for serving as both the discussant and the chair of this seminar. And hello, everyone. I'm truly, truly thankful to all of you for being here, both or either online or in person here. I know how all of you, how busy you are, and yet you took the time to be here with us. So I feel very, very privileged. And I do want to extend my gratitude to my colleagues in the Office of External Relations and the Office of Information Technology, such as my good old friend and colleague, Zhang, and his colleagues. So the title of this talk today is Nurturing Success. I'm trying this. Is it working? Okay. Not working for me. James, it's not working. Okay, I overpressed now. Okay. Can I just try one more just in case? Okay. Okay, it does work. Okay. So the title of this talk today is Nurturing Successful Intellectual Styles for Creativity. And I would like to start this presentation by sharing a few images with you. So on the left, what you see is an old HSBC building, a symbol of modern finance. And in the center is a familiar overhead projector, once essential for presentations, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And on the right, you see a vibrant Coca-Cola advertisement showing its brand's effective marketing. So these images, I think to most of you are familiar, but you might be surprised why I want to start the talk by showing you these images. So the reason being, when I was invited to give this talk, I was encouraged to weave a historical narrative that links the past, the present, and the future of our faculty. So having been here since 1996, almost 30 years, I do recognize that my time here, though significant, is still merely a part of our history. So what I did is to turn to our longest serving faculty member, Professor Post Leung, and fondly known to all of us as Jerry. And true to form, Jerry uncovered a fascinating resource. A journal in his office, the Journal of Education. So you could figure those images I show you just now were included as advertisement in that journal. So this journal actually provides insights into the legacy of our faculty. And one part of a key legacy is our strong commitment to fostering creativity in education. And that strong commitment has been with us as the core value of our faculty for many, many years. And one of those key endeavors, I'd say, is the publication of this special issue for journal titled Examinations and Methods of Teaching that Encourage Creativity, edited by must be one of our old ex-colleagues, which I have never met, Raymond Subton, from then Department of Education back in 1968. So that's the story behind it. So while this journal reflects our history, we as faculty members, as students, continue to foster and embody creativity in our work. So before I say more, I give you more examples from the faculty as our creative endeavors. I will say a few words about the concept of creativity. I think my mouth is dry. Sorry. Always be prepared. Okay. So I want to say a few words about this to prepare for the rest of the talk. So there are many insightful definitions of creativity. I want to provide you with 3 early definitions of creativity or perspectives of creativity, and then I'll touch upon a more recent one, because these 3 have significantly shaped our understanding of the concept of creativity. So in early decades of creativity research, some psychologists put strong emphasis on the novel characteristics of creative products, focusing on products. Say, for example, Thurstone back in 1952 defined creativity simply as something new. And then Bartlett back in 1958 defined creativity as something that is surprising in light of what was known at the time of discovery. And a bit later, Crutchfield defined creativity as something contrasting with conformity. So that is creative products. Meanwhile, other scholars focus on the creative process. So say, for example, Wallace, way back when in the 1920s, identified 4 different stages in creativity that will be preparation, incubation, illumination, and revision. Of course, we don't have time to go through all of that. And finally, this one, I think most of us, I was told to use the mic. Okay, which one? This is. This is for our online use. Is it working? I hope I won't be too loud for the answer. So Guilford, in his well-known theory of structure of intellect, defined creativity as divergent thinking, highlighting the importance of generating multiple ideas and multiple solutions. But I do want to present you with a more recent perspective. So recent scholars consider the very aspects of creativity. It's not just 1 or 2, it is the 7 C's. So the 7 C's model provides a framework to understand creativity in terms of, first of all, creators. That will be people who create. That will be people who create the works. Creating, the act of producing new work. Collaboration, that will be interactions with others for creation. Context, that will be physical and social environment. Creation itself, the new production and its characteristics. Consumption, the uptake and adoption of creative work. And finally, curricula, that will be teaching and developing creativity through education. So before I move on to focus on the work on intellectual styles, which is the main topic today, I will share a few more examples of creative efforts from our faculty, because indeed this is celebration of our faculty. But before I do that, I want to introduce a recent perspective on creativity. So traditionally, creativity is understood as a rare gift that only a select few can possess. And yet, our creations are wonderfully diverse, ranging from the groundbreaking works of eminent scientists and artists to the delightful expressions of our young children. And indeed, Kaufman and Begetto, back in 2009, classified our creations, or rather human creations, into 4 different levels in terms of our impact or the creation's impact. The most impactful work are known as the big C's, big creations. And these will be the inventions by eminent creators and innovators, creations that have changed or have the potential to change the course of history. Say, for example, the invention of electricity, the invention of AI assistants, and so on and so forth, the big ones. And the second most impactful creation would be known as the PROCES, standing for professional. Over here, we see the significant contributions by people like you and me, professions in specific field. And next, we have little Cs. These are the everyday works that enrich our lives. Say, for example, a group of engineering students created, say, for example, a compact solar-powered phone charger that you can easily put in your backpack or even a lady's purse. So that enrich our everyday lives. And finally, we have what we call the mini Cs. These are the personal thinking and productions of both from young children and adults. These are something like personal, reflecting personal growth. Say, for example, if I cook slightly differently, that's a creativity, that's a mini C. Okay, so just now, I promised to give you a couple more examples of our faculty's creative efforts. So as a long-serving member of the faculty, I have had the privilege of observing a wealth of creative efforts. So based on my observation, in addition to that journal that Professor Paul Slim provided, I saw at least two pro-C level innovation. The first one, back in 1995, one of my former colleagues, Professor Brian Cook, spearheaded the establishment of CUT, known as Center for Advancement of University Teaching, now known as CETL, that is the Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. And then back in 2010, another colleague, former colleague of mine, Professor Amy Cui, headed a major reform at Hong Kong U, leading to our current curriculum, the CCC, the Common Core Curriculum. So of course, at the individual level, my colleagues and our students have embarked on remarkably creative work, leading to remarkably creative products. And it is precisely these creative efforts and products that have contributed significantly to our prestigious ranking as the #1 faculty in the whole world. So as we reflect upon these creative efforts and outcomes, it is crystal clear that one of the focus or our strong messages is to foster creativity. So building upon these creative efforts or collective creative efforts and outcomes, I would like to now shift my presentation to work on intellectual styles. So of course, one could say there are many ways to fostering creativity. And for that matter, positive, you will see when I do my presentation for research findings, I have gone beyond creativity, more generally, student learning, teachers teaching, academic teaching. So there are many ways to do that, but as an educational psychologist who has dedicated much of my career, as Professor Ding Yang said, to the understanding of the nature of intellectual styles, I believe that understanding intellectual styles could very well be a key to promoting creativity and, for that matter, positive attributes and outcomes more generally. So in the rest of this talk, I will provide you with evidence by taking you through these following points. To begin with, I will define the construct of intellectual styles, and then I will provide a general background on the field of intellectual styles. I will then focus on a couple controversial issues in the field. And then the bulk, of course, I will try to be brief on presenting the research findings, leading to 3 conclusions. Since I'm going to repeat this later, so I'm not going to read it for now. I am conscious of the time. I have till 4:45. So, And then somewhere along the line, I will, this is important in red, I will provide 2 KPIs to the general findings that I'll be presenting. The first KPI is the notion of successful intellectual styles, which is in the title. And secondly, I will point out 2 paradoxes. Because my general findings say one thing, and then when you come to institutional performance, I'll explain later, you see something else. So that could be a very good lead-in to our discussion later. So finally, to conclude the talk, I'll be talking about the implications of the findings for fostering creativity and more generally, adaptive attributes and outcomes. So now, intellectual styles. I think some of this audience here are my students, so you're familiar with the work. Even my colleagues, maybe most of you are familiar with the work. So intellectual styles, as you know, we actually use the notion of style very liberally. Styles of clothing, painting, writing, indeed, the styles of organizing an event such as this. But intellectual styles refer to our preferred ways of using the abilities that we have. I just want to point out that the notion of intellectual style is used as an encompassing term that would encompassing 70 plus some style labels or constructs. So one of my contributions, as Professor Yang, Dean Yang said, is actually you look at the literature and see what you can do for the literature. How can you bring some order to a chaotic field? So the notion of intellectual style is a general term. The key here is to notice the difference between styles and abilities. While our abilities refers to what we can do, styles refers to how to do what we do. So you might be thinking to yourself then, what kind of phenomena can the notion of style explain? So I would argue that the notion of styles can explain the kind of phenomenon that we cannot use the traditional constructs, say, for example, abilities or personalities or even motivations, constructs that were traditionally used to explain individual differences. Styles go far beyond that. Say, for example, intellectual styles can address such a question, or at least help to express such question as how is it possible for a student to fail a multiple choice test, but at the same time to excel on an individual project? How should one explain the fact that the same professor was evaluated very highly by one group of students, but rather poorly by another? How is it possible that some students may benefit tremendously from AI assistant education, but others may not? And so these are all, of course, in education context. Finally, style, I just want to point out, because I'm focusing on research findings in education, but styles go far beyond education. Say, for example, it can also help to answer the questions such as, how is it possible for the same business executive to do a lousy job in leading one organization, but to prove himself or herself a great asset in another? So before I show you that styles do have such magical power by providing you with research findings, I want to say a few words about the field of intellectual styles. Well, the field of styles has a long history. Actually, it was back in 1937 that the field of style claimed to have begun. It has a long history of over 8 decades. And yet the field had been constantly struggle for its identity due to several major challenges. So here comes one of the challenges. One of the challenges had been arising from a few controversial issues over the nature of intellectual styles. I want to focus on 2 of these because these 2, style value and style malleability, are the most relevant to the rest of this talk. So I wouldn't have time to talk about the other issues. So style malleability concerns the question of nature and nurture. Simply put, are we born with certain styles that are static, or can we change our styles? And style value, are there good styles or bad styles? Are some styles more adaptive in some situations, so say, for example, in your achievement or your development, your personality, and so on and so forth? Are there good ones or bad ones? So those are the questions that we have been trying to understand. So over the years, many scholars have been trying their best to understand those two issues at least. So among these efforts, a number of scholars have been trying to bring order to the field by creating integrative models on styles. I want to talk about the one that Professor Stenberg and I, back in actually 2 decades ago, we came up with this threefold model of intellectual styles. I want to bring up this one because 2 decades passed by. Still, this is the only model thus far that has dealt with 3 controversial issues in the field. So according to this model, styles are essentially value-laden, that there are more adaptive ones and less adaptive ones. And styles are malleable. And finally, this issue I'm not going to be dealing with, but styles overlap highly across the theories. So this is our argument based on conceptualization and empirical evidence. And beyond dealing with those 3 controversial issues, we classified all styles into 3 types. So we can discuss the details, but just to say, all those 70, I was talking about 70-some style construct. Each construct, you may have 13 styles, others maybe have 3. So you're talking about hundreds of styles. So how can you bring some order to it? By conceptualizing and by empirical evidence. So the 3 types of styles. So type 1 styles are creativity generating, and they denote higher levels of cognitive complexity. These styles, please remember, because I'm going to, the rest of the presentation, I'm going to mention this type 1 and type 2 very frequently. So these type of styles are considered more adaptive or desirable or positive because research evidence has shown that they are routinely associated with positive attributes and outcomes. And type 2 styles are the exact opposite. They are norm-favoring, or they communicate a norm-favoring tendency, and they denote lower levels of cognitive complexity. So they are maladaptive and undesirable because if you look at the literature, the research finding, they are mostly associated with maladaptive attributes and outcomes. So type 3, we'll just leave it there because I'm not going to present too much. So just to say their value varies because the ways in which these type of styles are associated with other attributes and outcomes varies depending on time and situation, unlike the other 2, which are very patent. So just now I mentioned that the style of the field of styles has a history of over 8 decades. So by now, there has been a large body of literature. And in these 2 books, actually these are old books, but these conclusions I made still stand because I continue to do work on intellectual styles, and so do some of my students. So the claims that I make will keep standing. So focusing on the malleability of intellectual styles, this book was published in 2013. And this one focused on the value of intellectual styles, was published in 2017. So in this talk, or in the rest of the talk, I'm going to present you with some research evidence. I will constrain or confine the evidence within the education arena because we don't have time to talk business setting and all of that. So I'll focus on, these do have chapters on business settings, but I'll focus the research finding on education context. But before I do that, let me provide you with just this one slide in terms of the research methodology that this field tend to use. Well, different parts of the world has been participated in this type of research. Of course, some people say, well, styles research is almost like a rich country kind of phenomenon. There is a lack of study in countries that are economically and otherwise disadvantaged. So diverse populations, academic and non-academic, of course, including people from Hong Kong, mainland China, anywhere in the world, have been the target of the research in terms of participation. And the wide range of theoretical foundations, both in terms of styles and other kind of construct in psychology, as well as relevant constructs in education and business, have been used or serving as the foundation of this body of research. In terms of research design, I have to admit that the majority of the research are cross-sectional, or even more strictly, they will be one-shot data gathering. So of course, those with limitations, but there are enough longitudinal and experimental study to inform us in terms of the malleability of intellectual styles. And finally, in terms of the research tools, the most of the research, or majority of the research, use self-report tests. But then again, there are a decent numbers of studies that adopt tests of maximal performance, that will be tests with correct and wrong answers, classroom observations, interviews, and different kinds of interventions that I'm not going to say it one by one, just to make sure we're on time. So next, I'll focus on research findings on style value. So in this 9-chapter book, I dedicated 7 chapters, the middle 7 chapters, providing research evidence showing that styles are value-laden. There is a specific chapter on creativity and styles, which is the topic of today's talk. But I'm going to embed research findings on creativity and styles within the broader concept or context of intellectual styles in student learning and process and development. And in addition, I will be providing you with research evidence on the role of intellectual styles among school teachers and academics. I will also provide you with evidence on the role of intellectual styles in our physical and mental well-being. So that's what I'm going to do quickly in the next few slides. But I'd like to advance the general finding first. So what have we found in general, which will be in the next few slides? We found that type 1 styles are generally superior to type 2 styles because the former, that is type 1 styles, are routinely associated with positive outcomes, as I defined in styles just now. So first of all, in terms of student learning, or more strictly speaking, learning processes, we found that those students who adopt, or at least they report that they adopted type 1 styles more frequently, tend to think more creatively, more critically, and they tend to be more reflective. That is metacognitive process. They tend to be more reflective about their learning, and they display more signs of effective brain functioning. So these, I don't have any citation, please trust me. These all have proper citations. You can find it in the book and elsewhere. There are new research findings as well. And also they learn, not because they want to avoid failure, but because they want to achieve success. Those of you who are in educational psychology, this will be the definition from achievement motivation. Okay, so those of you who are not in the field, I apologize. So we can clarify later. So the advantage or the advantages of type 1 styles over type 2 styles have also being identified in the context of student development. Just now is student learning process and attributes. Now it's developmental outcomes. Say, for example, compared with students who report the use of type 2 styles more often, those students who report the type 1 styles more often tend to display higher levels of cognitive complexity and higher levels of emotional intelligence. They have a better sense of vocational purpose, and they have a wider range of career interest. They have a clearer sense of who they are, that is sense of identity, and they demonstrate and they show more adaptive personalities. Say, for example, they are more open-minded, they're more resilient, and so on and so forth. And indeed, they are happier. They have a higher level of psychological, subjective or psychological well-being. So that's quickly about students. There are many more recent findings that we don't have time to. So the superiority of type 1 styles over type 2 styles were also identified among studies with school teachers and university academics. Say, for example, those teachers and school academics, this maybe university academics, sometimes I'll just say teachers, just to be brief. Those who reported type 1 styles more frequently tend to demonstrate more adaptive personality traits and positive emotions in their teaching. So we studied the kind of emotions they have during their teaching. And they show more confidence in terms of both their teaching and research. And they reported lower levels of occupational stress and more or higher levels of job satisfaction. And indeed, they show more prominent character strengths as represented by, I think a lot of you know, as the 8 universal virtues. Say, for example, wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. So those are what we know as the 8 universal virtues. So those are attributes and so on and so forth. So in terms of their research behavior, teaching and research behaviors and outcomes, those who use type 1 style more often, or again, at least report they use more styles more often, tend to display beneficial humor styles when they teach. And they tend to facilitate conceptual change as opposed to do information transmission. And they demonstrate more adaptive organizational commitment. What does that mean? So say, for example, they are committed to the faculty or to the university, not because they want the money or they cannot find a job elsewhere, but because they really are emotionally attached to the university, to the organization, and they really feel that they can realize their career dreams in the organization. And indeed, they are more productive. So I highlighted one, the setting and pursue more trailblazing research agenda. I highlighted this one because I want to provide you with a bit more detail about this research, because we have Professor Horter right here. He and his student, actually, they are the real brains behind this conceptualization of and research on research agendas among academics. So research agenda, actually the concept has been referenced by many scholars for decades. And yet it was not until 2014 when Professors Erdmann and Galuski defined it for academics per se. And they define academics research agenda as both a blueprint for academic careers and a set of actions to achieve research goals. So building on this concept, Professor Horter and one of his students just now, I said they are really the pioneer in terms of researching on academics research agendas. So based on thorough review of the literature, they identified 8 dimensions that influence academics research agenda setting and pursuit. And these are scientific ambition, divergence, convergence, discovery, conservative approaches, tolerance for low funding, mental influence, and collaboration. And going beyond that 8 dimensions, Professor Horter and Dr. Santos, based on their own research and further conceptualization, they classify those 8 dimensions into 2 types. The first type is trailblazing research agendas. Trailblazing research agendas thrive on multidisciplinary collaboration and ambitious risk-taking projects. Academics who pursue this kind of research agendas tend to be driven by a passion for pioneering research that takes complex that involves complex challenges. I'm being too loud, by the way, for you here. Okay, thank you. And eventually, these type of research often lead to groundbreaking work. And the opposite is cohesive research agendas. And those would be focusing on specialization, stability, and risk aversion. This type of, or academics who pursue this type of work would be the ones who prefer low-risk projects that will provide somewhat immediate outcomes and short-term rewards. So if you look at this kind of definition, you almost remind me of type 1 styles and type 2 styles. It's precisely, I read Professor Horter's work, like, hey, we could really do something together. So Professor Horter and I, Professor Jason Zhang and Professor Paul Leon, we had a GRF project together, and we produced some work. So what have we found? These are 3 unique studies that I want to point out, because remember that intellectual styles is an encompassing term, it's an overall term. So it encompasses, say, for example, these are the 3 thinking styles, teaching styles, and research styles. So in our first study, published in 2020, we examined the relationship between thinking styles and research agendas. And this is the diverse international sample of social sciences across the world, as I said, international. The second study, we actually collected more data, but in one study we published, we only selected academics in Hong Kong from a STEM field. We tried to find the association between their teaching styles and research agendas. And this is more recent research. Actually, this is still ongoing. This is the data we collected recently. So in this research, we broke new ground, actually. We expand our research on research agenda from academics to our PhD students. And we also reconceptualize thinking styles into research styles. So what have we found? The finding was remarkable, I would say, or you can already imagine. We found that creativity generating intellectual styles, be that thinking, teaching, or research, are consistently associated with trailblazing research agendas. And on the other hand, non-favoring styles would be associated with cohesive research agendas. So much for that. The expert is there. So if you want to understand more about research agenda, you know where to go. Okay, so finally, in terms of style value, coming to the function of intellectual styles in our physical and mental health. In the same book I was talking about back in 2017, The Value of Intellectual Styles, I reviewed 2 types of comparative studies. The first type of comparative studies is to compare people with and without these type of, I'd say, mental and physical problems. Because of time, I'm not going to read them through. And the second type of comparative study is to compare those people with different degrees of these problems. And the findings, again, are striking. What we found is that type 2 styles, those norm-favoring styles, were consistently associated with these type of problems. Okay, so you have the opposite kind of finding there. So much about this style value. So let me summarize a bit here. So based on the research findings I've presented so far on the value of intellectual styles, one might think that intellectual styles can be dichotomized into good ones and bad ones. But it is true, is it really, that type 1 styles are always adaptive and that type 2 styles are always undesirable? The answer is actually no, not necessarily. Because although type 1 styles seldom have been proven to be maladaptive, the opposite is otherwise. Type 2 styles have been at times found to carry positive values. So having said that, I must add a caveat to what I said earlier, type 1 style in terms of the effectiveness of type 1 styles. Indeed, this disconnect between the type 1 styles lack of effectiveness of, actually, let me talk about successful intellectual style. Based on this kind of observation, I created I coined the term successful intellectual styles. So that will be what I call the first caveat. So unfortunately, there is a caveat number 2. And that caveat number 2 is in terms of a function of type 1 styles in terms of institutional performance. So based on the research findings I presented just now, so practically we are saying, or the research findings are suggesting, that type 1 styles are far superior to type 2 styles. And yet, that kind of observation, general observation, does not apply when it comes to institutional performance. What do I mean by institutional performance? So say, for example, in many schools and universities, those students who think and behave most creatively may not necessarily be the ones who achieve the best academic grades. And in the workplace, including university and school context, those employees who behave and think and work most productively, most creatively, may not necessarily receive that promotions or get that promotions that they truly deserve. So it is precisely those type of disconnect between the lack of effectiveness of type 1 styles in terms of institutional performance and the general observation that create what I call a paradox. So you can remember that paradox for now. So then the question is, well, should we cultivate type 1 styles? Should we cultivate creativity generating intellectual styles? Yeah, so that really raises a question. But for now, I'm not going to deal with that question. We're going to deal with later together. For now, I'm going to shift the gear to another issue on style malleability. So naturally, you might be sitting there asking yourself, where do those styles come from? Can we change our styles? So answers to those questions would be contributing to the second issue of controversial issue in terms of nature of intellectual style. That would be style malleability. So in terms of this question, my personal view has always been that styles are malleable, and I like to use some research evidence to support my view. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the research, very little research on the genetic etiology of intellectual styles. Again, back in 2009, actually, this is one of my books that I edited. I have a chapter from Professor Green from Yale University. What she did is a thorough review of the literature on the genetic etiology of styles. Unfortunately, she was only able to identify 2 studies that have ever been conducted to examine the extent to which our intellectual styles can be explained by genetic factors. were conducted in 1971, I believe. Yeah. The first study examining the genetic etiology of field dependence independence. I know some of you are not familiar with the term, but let me move on. The finding is important. The heritability estimate of that style they examined was only 0.11. And that is to say, only 11% of our variations in that particular intellectual style are heritable or can be explained by genetic factors. And the second study she found was conducted back in 1979. That is on the genetic etiology of reflective and impulsive styles, which is a twin study of young twins. But the findings of this study was even more dramatic, and that is the correlations of style was higher for identical twins than those for fraternal twins, when in fact those results could have been reversed. So based on the limited study, you could say there is very little evidence to say that our styles are heritable. So we have to look through how styles are socialized and changed. So that gave me a job to do. Back in 2013, I used this book to examine 2 lines of investigations on the issue of style malleability. The first line of investigation examines the relationship between styles and a whole bunch of socialization variables. And the second one actually going through experimental studies available at the time to see whether or not there would be styles training effect. So I will give you a couple of examples for the styles training. But for the first one, I don't have too much time, just to say there is plenty of research and studies have shown that styles matter, styles differ based on socialization variables. In my book, I look through culture, gender, academic discipline, and occupation. And there are other factors I didn't look into. So in this same book, I reviewed the experimental studies available at the time, introducing hundreds of studies based on a whole range of intellectual styles, including this. Each one of these are different constructs. So these studies span over 5 decades, and they were conducted in different parts of the world and based on different kinds of style constructs. I highlighted thinking styles in red because I want to use the next slide to introduce some studies that my students have done, just very briefly. So these are the drawings actually portraying the 13 thinking styles that are put forward by Professor Stenberg. And Professor Stenberg actually put forward a very straightforward concept. Using the term government as a metaphor, he argued that much like a society can be governed in various ways, individuals could use their abilities in different manners. And each of those different ways of using our abilities forms into one unique style. Because of time, I'm not going to go through each individual style in detail, but it is important to say, or to put in a note, that these 13 styles, like other styles, have been classified into the 3 types of styles that I mentioned. Here are several, I'd say, sample experimental studies that examine parallel effects. So when you do styles training, they do not only, these training, so this research has shown at least, do not only enhance the use of type 1 learning styles, but also enhance their other kinds of development. So each of these studies involves designing innovative courses whereby school teachers and university academics were trained to teach either in type 1 teaching styles or alternative methods that are all designed to foster type 1 students, in this case, students type 1 learning styles. So these are the methods designed. Say, for example, these include immersing students in a hypermedia learning environment, exposing them to different teacher interpersonal behaviors, broadening students' time perspective through a course, using, of course, type 1 and finally, exposing students to a service learning approach. Each one of these is actually one of the doctoral dissertations by my own students. So what have they found? Consistently, these studies found that those students who were in treatment groups did not only enhance their type 1 learning style, reported more often use of type 1 learning styles, but also they have demonstrated gains in various other domains. Say, for example, the green color one. Say, for example, they have reported higher levels of achievement motivation, again, to approach success, not to avoid failure, academic performance. They have reported higher levels of internal locus of control. These are all in psychology, positive attributes. And beyond that, they have enriched their career interest, and also they have heightened their sense of social responsibility. So those are just a few examples I wanted to show. Okay, so now we come to the conclusion part. So based on the research evidence that I have presented, both on style value and style malleability, and actually much, much more that we don't have time for today, we could draw three conclusions. First of all, styles matter. They matter in diverse domains in the education sector. Of course, it goes beyond education because the research evidence I presented were only in education. I'd only claim within the education sector, and more importantly, in our physical and mental well-being. And secondly, type 1 styles are generally more adaptive, more valued, more desirable than our type 2 styles. And thirdly, styles can be developed. That is, styles are malleable. But at this point, I also would like to bring you back to the two caveats I mentioned. The first one is the notion of successful intellectual style, and that is the positive growth of certain attributes, such as, say, for example, creativity, creative thinking, and a few others. Their growth requires not only type 1 styles, but also type 2, type 3 styles. And that is a wide range of styles, but predominantly type 1 styles. So that is a first caveat put on the general findings. And secondly, the second caveat is type 1 styles are not always duly rewarded, despite their adaptiveness showing in other domains. But unfortunately, the second caveat also presented a paradox that arising from the disconnect between the lack of effectiveness of type 1 styles in terms of institutional performance and the general observation that type 1 styles are superior to type 2 styles. So in reality, we are, you could say that particular paradox actually entails another one. So in fact, we as a whole are, this is not just in Hong Kong, remember this is worldwide research findings. We are in general in education confronted with two paradoxes. First of all, although students, teachers, and academics display a wide range of intellectual styles, many educational institutions do not actively encourage this diversity. And secondly, although type 1 styles are typically more adaptive, many educational institutions tend to favor type 2 styles when they come to the issue of institutional performance, such as academic grades or career advancement. Okay, So having said that, one should be thinking or say that some part of our educational system, not just in Hong Kong, but globally, are heading for the wrong direction. So perhaps that's one of the take-home message. Okay, so at this point, I would like you or to invite you to think about or reflect upon your teaching and learning environment or your work environment in general. Have you noticed, say, for example, similar paradoxes in your environments? And what factors do you think have contributed or led to those issues or paradoxes or problems? And thirdly, what strategies could be implemented to address those paradoxes or problems? Of course, after you think about this, you could articulate a view right now, or you could wait till later for the discussion, because I do have a few more slides addressing the issue of implications. But those implications, I'm sure you have already thought about it already. I really don't have to go through the slides. So you could take it as if the discussion that's the bulk of the presentation. But at this point, anybody has any views or say something? Any questions so far? You could think about it for now. Anyone would like to articulate the view right now or later? Later, okay. So this is what I have to offer. Of course, there are tons of strategies that you could think of. But given that research findings have shown that successful intellectual styles are conducive to positive attributes and outcomes, in addition to creativity, I would argue that, so this is talking about the strategies that you could use. I would argue that we could foster successful intellectual styles to address these issues. Then the next logical question would be, what can you do to address those issues, to foster successful intellectual styles? So based on the research findings or based on the definition of successful intellectual styles, which is a wide repertoire or wide range of styles, particularly type 1 styles, and supplemented by type 2, and type 3, we could say that there are two broad strategies that we could take. First of all, we could allow for diverse styles. And secondly, we could encourage type 1 styles. And these kind of broad strategies could apply to different parties or stakeholders at any given institutions. Particularly, we could think about students, school teachers and university academics, student development educators. By student development educators, I refer to any non-teaching staff, say, for example, our research office, our student affairs office, and external relations, and so on and so forth, those staff members. And finally, school and university senior managers. You want me to continue? So in terms of student, I'll present a few. These are really not limited to this. There are many, many implications you can think of. So in terms of students, I think the most important message here is the style awareness. I think an understanding of the notion of just to hear about it, just to hear that styles make a difference, not only in their own learning styles, but also in their teachers' teaching styles, that could enhance their self-esteem and learning motivation. For one simple reason, a lot of times, students who do not perform to their best often blame themselves for being stupid. But knowing the concept of styles, they might rethink about the reasons why they don't perform particularly well in a particular context. They could think about their own styles and their teachers' styles. So they could probably actively either to adapt to the environment or actively shape their learning environment. How do you shape your learning environment? Say, for example, you choose one elective course that doesn't suit you, you could choose another. By doing that, you're shaping your learning environment. Yeah? Okay. So not only that, an understanding of intellectual styles or notion of intellectual styles could enhance students' interpersonal development. Most likely, you will see students who understand the concept will be more tolerant about individual differences along a whole host of values and ways of doing things and so on and so forth. So again, these are not the only implications for students. So in terms of teachers and academics, there are two sets of implications I'd like to talk about. The first one is in terms of allow for diverse intellectual style, allow for diverse intellectual styles. First of all, when we instruct, when we teach, and when we assess students, if we limit our way of teaching to one or even two ways of teaching or assessment, then only part of our students are benefit from our teaching styles or assessment format. So by diversifying them, we would be pitching for more students. Students who have different kinds of abilities could shine. The second one, in terms of changing attributions about students' performance. Well, not only students, when they don't do well, I talk too much. Not only students, when they don't do well, blame themselves, but also teachers tend to blame themselves. Oh, they're stupid. Oh, they have low ability. So by understanding that notion of style, teachers perhaps could also change their attribution of students' performance and treating students differently and expecting students a bit differently as well. So, and finally, of course, I didn't have time to present these research findings, but just trust me to think that there are a lot of factors that based upon which styles could differ. So those individual differences based on socialization. So perhaps teachers and university academics could also show sensitivity to those individual or group differences. So that is in terms of allow for diverse styles. And in terms of cultivating type 1 styles or creativity generating intellectual styles, I think the most important one is role modeling. The most important one is role modeling. So today, I'm standing here for 1 hour talking. So if I do this every day to my class, most likely when my students graduate and become a teacher, they probably do the same. So normally I don't do the same. So just to make sure I demonstrate their different ways of teaching, their creative ways of doing things. So secondly, in terms of tolerating mistakes and encourage sensible risk-taking. This is important because whenever you knock down someone for making a simple mistake, so perhaps that individual, whoever he or she is, will not take risk. Remember that creativity takes a long time, trial and error. So allowing for mistakes is critically important. And then the last one, facilitating students' non-academic experiences. So somewhere along the book, I was also reviewing research evidence that students and indeed teachers who have different kinds of experiences tend to think more creatively and so on and so forth. So for that reason, perhaps facilitating students' non-academic experiences is not a bad idea. Couple more minutes, I'll be done. Okay, so in terms of student development educators, it's the same thing if you go to CDS or whatever. So I believe if student development educators utilize different styles to engage with students, students will emulate their way of working. So design implementing programs that deepen understanding of diverse values and perspective, broaden student perspective, that would be helpful as well. then cultivating complex thinking. A lot of times, students go to student affairs or other offices for decision making. So show complex thinking, taking more diverse views into consideration, discuss with students. That would be a model for students. Demonstrating open-mindedness, that's critics' way of thinking. So we don't have time to elaborate on more details, but just finally, none of those strategies would be effectively implemented without being done systematically. And that is to say, to foster creative ways of thinking or to allow for diverse way of thinking, we should then, well, a lot of things we prefer bottom up rather than top down. But when you cultivate creativity or creative way of thinking, you really need to do it from top down. So to cultivate creative thinking among students, university leaders, senior management teams need to do it starting from teachers, university academics, and student development educators. So to conclude this talk, this is the final slide. I would like to claim or make a bigger claim or assert a broader perspective. So these days, there have been, I would say that today's research findings are very, very in tune with the fast changing world that demand creativity from all of us. So most notably, there has been extensive discourse on the emerging era of AI, particularly with regard to the relationship between AI and human intelligence and creativity. But let's not forget what our godmother for AI, Professor Phoebe Li from Stanford University, tells us. She reminded us that artificial intelligence is not a substitute for human intelligence. It is the tool to amplify human creativity and ingenuity. I strongly agree with Professor Phoebe Li in that ultimately, I believe that human creativity would be making a real difference. AI need to work with us. They need to harmonize with us. But beyond that, I believe that fostering successful intellectual styles would enhance that particular human creativity. With that, I just want to thank you again, and I really thank you for the privilege. Not because they are mine, but because I believe they really systematically review the work in the field. So if you have any interest in discussing, I'll be discussing. Yeah, thank you. So, I know the next slide, right? Maybe you do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Li-fang. Let me give some comments before I pass on to the audience for questions. Our dean started the introduction by saying how remarkable the research and findings of Li-fang are, and I think we need to go a bit beyond that. And I have here some comments. One of it is that I think these findings go beyond education. Sure, they touch all levels of education that we can think of, and if they report to students, they report to educators, teachers, whatever we can think of. But I think it goes way beyond education, and it goes way beyond the individual. If you think about it, these findings clearly pertain to individuals, organizations, and to systems. And as I was listening, and the idea of the intellectual that is linked to the individual actually can very much be linked to the organizational components, to the system components. And I was thinking about how this research can really contribute decisively to innovation studies, for example, to entrepreneurship, to the organizational literature, to the governance literature, to leadership literature. And all of this is literature that doesn't really focus necessarily on the individual, meaning that this research goes well beyond education and well beyond psychology, in my opinion. What we're having here is something that can be used by business and by organizations. And if you think about the thinking organizations concept, very much associates to this, the idea of change, the idea of transformation, the idea that organizations can be creative and can contribute to change society. But you also have this in engineering. The idea of systems engineering is exactly based on these ideas of creativity. Let's not simply do what we have in front of us for the sake of completing this task, but let's think ahead. Let's think out of the box and give the next step, already thinking about future conditions. This is, it matches very well, everybody's trying to look for the new Silicon Valley, the new Route 128, the new innovation triangle, now the GBA. A lot of the solutions probably rest with implications of the findings brought about by Li-fang. When you think about organizations that are in Silicon Valley, we think about networks. They constantly engage people with one another, with diversity. They basically want opposing ideas. They want discussion. People is perceived as human capital, but not as working units, meaning that the idea is that they bring capability, they bring capacity of thinking, of bringing something new to the whole endeavor in which people are involved in. Of course, resources are of relevance here, and they're likely a very big part of whatever transformation we might be thinking about. Li-fang mentioned at the very end something that I think is absolutely critical in all of this, the environment. The environment not only brings stability to create spaces of thinking and creativity, but to stimulate it, to make it diverse, to bring up free thinking and not simply follow established rules. What we're talking about here is adaptability, which you mentioned in terms of the thinking styles, but also it refers to the idea of development. And development is very much linked also with the idea not only of the characteristics of the thinking styles, but with the fact that they can be changed. We can create organizations and we can create individuals that change to become more creative. They're not necessarily stuck in wherever they come from or from wherever they come from. Now, having said this, I think it's important to think about thinking styles as ways to adapt to increasing competition and to increasing adaptability. And I think all of us are facing this. I would like to raise 3 points, I think. One is the issue of the paradoxes and decision-making. I think we really need to get to a conclusion to get to know what we really want out of things. And this might mean leaving some things in the past, dropping some traditions to go into the future. And I think the change in thinking styles pertains to that. The other one is the creation of mechanisms to make matching works. Sometimes we need to say, okay, we want to have a creative organization, we need to have creative people, so on and so forth. But how are we going to match individuals with the organizations? How are we going to recruit the right people for the right job? Basically, how to decrease uncertainty. The third point, failure, the importance of failure. I think in our societies, this is getting scarce, and it's important to fail. We need to fail. We learn by failing. If everything that we do is a success, then we are not learning much because we already have it. We're already being successful at what we're doing. Finally, I have a bit of a concern at the very end. It seems to me that AI may be a replacement for jobs that rely on type 2. Will AI be in charge of the type 2 and the next evolutionary step for societies and for labor markets and for individuals is simply to having no chance but to focus on type 1 styles because AI will handle the type 2. So this is my comments, and I leave it to the audience to bring their own questions or including the ones online. So I open the floor for questions. Thank you.
We only have 6 minutes, actually 5. Yeah. I really want to ask many questions. I know this. You can go on and ask this.
There was one question. You can start. So the first question can be yours, and then in the back.
Can I have 2?
And then we can always continue the dialogue later.
Yes.
Li-fang, I appreciate what you say. I learn a lot. But I feel I'm struggling. I'm still struggling with the term intellectual. What do you mean by intellectual? Because it's based on what you said and put in the picture you presented, it's a school environment. And you mentioned teachers, students, and scholars all the time. What about a carpenter? Or what about an athlete? That certainly play with different style. And whether or not your intellectual style applies equally or to a great extent to those people. So I really do not know what you mean by intellectual. It's not even academic. And you also talk about other things like attitudinal, ethical issues. That's one question, definition of an intellectual. The other is, in psychology, famous Michigan group led by Nisbet, the geography of thought. And that's, of course, something I have been fascinated by those 4 decades in cultural thinking. I remember I approached you, tried to work together with you. You actually declined me, and you actually rejected because I want to do something like those thinking styles. You forgot.
Sure.
Yeah, and because I was following that group, famous group, Michigan first, and then scatter all over the world. Just that kind of thinking. You will be familiar with that. Any link between these two?
Oh, okay. I have this. I actually didn't quite get your second question in terms of link. Okay, so in terms of first question, the definition of intellectual styles, I don't know if I was saying it too rigidly or so forth. But basically, intellectual styles, what we need to do is to distinguish that with our abilities. Say, for example, both you and I have probably, if you and I take 100 of IQ tests, our IQ test could be roughly the same, and yet you do much better than I do in this particular organization. Is it that I'm stupid, or is it that I have low ability? No, perhaps this organization fits better with the way you do things, you use your abilities. So intellectual styles, of course, Professor Horton was also talking about thinking styles. Actually, thinking styles is only, as I actually rushed through everything. I actually yelled through everything. I apologize for that because of time. I was really rushing through content. But intellectual style is actually an overall, a general term that encompasses many style constructs, including thinking styles. So if you go to the bottom of that, is really the way we process information. Say, for example, facing the same task, perhaps user will just prioritize her work, say, for example, with priority. But I will probably just focus on one thing. User probably this or that will make a list of questions and, oh, this is more important to do first, but I'm going to cover all of them. This is, in my field, their styles would be a more effective way of doing things. That's more creative. For me, I can only focus on one thing at a time. But is it necessarily that my style is always the worst? Perhaps in some given situation, perhaps type 2 styles are also needed. Say, for example, if you buy an iPhone, say, for example, naturally, you will need to follow the instruction to make sure the iPhone works properly. That's not the situation when you say, let me take the iPhone apart and say, let me resemble them in a more creative way. So that's not the time we do creative things. So it depends on the situation. So it's really the way we process information, we approach tasks. That's the way. So what it does is a lot of, I don't blame you for asking that question because for many years, as I said, in my field, even though it has a history of 8 decades, more than 8 decades, a lot of people would argue with me when I gave a keynote, well, there's no such thing as styles. Actually, by the way, Professor Zhang, another former colleague of ours, he played a major role in my field. He was actually my predecessor in the field. He constructed the notion of learning approaches, actually based on his work, groundbreaking work. Our faculty has been thinking about Chinese learner and so on and so forth. Of course, based on his and many others' work, I reconceptualized the notion, came up with a framework model. So he was really one of the giant shoulders upon which I had to find to stand on. So, so there you go. It's not a simple construct. A lot of people would argue, well, there's no such thing as styles. But if you look through the literature, styles do predict and explain the kind of variations in both learning and performance far, far, far beyond the traditional constructs of abilities, personalities, something that we traditionally rely on. But I did miss your second question in terms of the link between A and B. I'm sorry. Can you?
Too complicated.
I'm sorry, I'm so stupid to answer that. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, we can discuss later. Perhaps just yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Joyce, and I used to be the student of Professor Zhang and Professor Huang, and also Professor Yang. And back to 6 years ago, actually. And I want to respond to the Professor Zhang's sharing about institutional performance, because from my working experience, people who prefer to listen to audio more like type 2 thinking styles instead of type 1 thinking styles. I use the term listen to order because, say for example, if you work in a school, you will need to listen to the order from the principal or listen to the order from the school supervisor. And if you are a more non-favoring person, then you are more easy to listen to the order and without your own independent thinking. Is this a kind of reasonable explanation for the reason why singing type 1 is not that favorable in the institutional performance? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think your question, Joyce, thank you. Welcome back. Your question relates to actually Ding Yang's part of the question I actually didn't get to in terms of carpenter. Do they apply to those kind of occupations? It depends on the particular situation you are in. So I'm not saying everybody should go for this type 1 styles. What I am saying is in many institutions, type 1 styles are not rewarded enough, not as much as we want it to be. What we need to do is to develop diverse ways of thinking and doing things so that when situation arises, when situation call upon us to use particular styles, we can use those particular styles. It's not one or the other. It is successful ones, but predominantly type 1s, I would think, given the research evidence that type 1 styles are conducive to positive outcomes to so many domains of our lives, except institutional performance. Is academic achievement that important? Is that promotion that important? No. I was ready to retire as an associate professor. No problem. That is true. That is true, by the way. You do your own things. You should define yourself by the creative work you do. You should be passionate about the work you do. That promotion is not that so important. But coming back to academic grades, a lot of times without that academic grades, you probably not be promoted to the next level of higher learning. So there's always the type of institution, that structure that confines us. That's why we, with the knowledge of intellectual styles, perhaps we can advocate for ourselves. Yeah, so it's a matter of style awareness. At certain situations, in any given circumstances, well, sometimes you do need to perform the way you're expected to. That is being strategic. That is being creative itself. Yeah, but we cannot just follow orders. We cannot just follow instructions and work within rules. We need to go beyond that. We need to shape our own learning and work environment.
I know we're past the time, but type 1 goes through all of these debates. So one more question from the audience and one from online. So Nutsa, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Li-fang.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Hugo, for chairing, for the faculty for organizing the seminar. Well, I think it was a good decision for me to come. It was a great learning experience. I didn't know much about learning styles, intellectual style before coming to this seminar, but I learned a lot and I'm leaving the room like I'm an expert.
You are. It's a simple concept, really.
I think it's because all the content, this rich content about the field, its challenges, its new findings were presented in a way that it was so easy to follow. I really enjoyed. Well, and I agree with you, Hugo, that it does have far-reaching implications for other fields. But it also has immediate implications for me as a teacher, as a researcher, and as a parent as well. So, Li-fang, you mentioned awareness, style awareness. And I have many questions how to be aware of my own style. And if you can shed light on how to assess intellectual styles and assessment techniques. And we are
prepared.
here in Hong Kong, China. And my follow-up question is about the role of culture. You just mentioned Greeks, and you mentioned Chinese learner. What do you think about role of culture in nurturing intellectual style?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Nusa. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you and my other colleagues and all the rest of you, either online or here. I'm really happy that you're all here, sharing your time with me. So in terms of assessment, each particular theoretical perspective, as I said, there are 70 plus some style construct. For each construct, there are ways of assessing it. I actually want prepared for a few, actually based on thinking styles. This is a particular style inventory that apply across any participants, any populations. This is very general. See, for example, I use the black one and the blue one. The blue one is actually type 2. Actually, no, I didn't do that. I'm sorry. I should have been better prepared. So I just use the blue and black in between just so that they distinguish. So say, for example, this is all, as I said, a lot of inventories are self-report. Of course, you could use maximal, I have an example, maximal performance in another slide. But this, say, for example, if you say a legislative style, meaning you could do things creatively, you create your own ideas. This is one particular sample item. I like tasks that allow me to do things my own way. That is only one. Of course, for each of the 13 thinkings, this is based on standard theory, there will be 5 items badging one particular one just to get the reliability and validity. So this is on thinking styles applying to any population. We also have an inventory focusing particularly on teaching styles. Say, for example, in teaching, it's very easy to do, actually. You just change some wording and apply thinking style into the context of teaching. Say, for example, the same style, legislative. I like students to plan an investigation of a topic that they believe is important. So that's allowing students to use their legislative style and therefore your own teaching style. And in my own research, I went beyond that because I really wanted to, I had in mind since 1996, when I joined here to do something for the field because I knew it was chaotic. So I also designed my own inventory in terms of, hey, do people really prefer thinking styles in teaching? Say, for example, it is important that teachers allow students to develop their own styles of solving problems from the student's view. So do people really prefer certain styles? So there are different ways of doing that. And do students really prefer teachers to teach in certain ways? So there just one particular theory, you can really devise an inventory in several ways so that you can get convergent evidence on one particular construct. So talking about tests of maximal performance, this is an example testing people's styles, field dependence, independence. This one has right or wrong answers. Yeah, so you find simple figures within these complex figures and so on and so forth. So I hope, so of course, each inventory has inventories. I have many, so if you're interested, I can always share. I'm sorry, Dinya, you intended to collaborate. I didn't even know, you didn't make it clear. But in any event, going back to your question about, or your comments about culture, of course, culture play a major role. Because as a construct, as a socialization factor itself, culture, if you go back to Hofstede's work, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, so any socialization factor, such as gender, such as academic discipline, such as culture in terms of national culture and the regional culture, whatever culture you're talking about, they are all, in the bottom line, would be socialization factors. They would definitely make a difference. I actually have research evidence demonstrating those people who come from, say, for example, Hofstede's culture, in Hofstede's definition, low power distance countries, say, for example, they would tend to fall on the field dependent, independent. So it would be falling on the field independent, which is the creativity generating style part. If you look through those cultural contexts from the economically or socially disadvantaged cultural context, you see they tend to fall on the field dependent, which is the non-favoring one. But does that mean we can stereotype these cultural people? Yeah. So the Chinese think this way, the American think that way. We cannot do that. So styles is more of like individual difference. Say, for example, within here, we're all highly educated academic students, doctoral students, master's degree students, and so forth. But so perhaps in general, we think more creatively, but yet within that general trend, there would be individual differences. Is a continuum rather than a two ends of continuum. It's a continue, not two ends, black and white. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Li-fang. Just a question online from Joanna Dean Zhang. She asks, the favor of type 2 style maybe because it is easier to measure. So in order to encourage type 1 style, is there any indicators appropriate for identifying and measuring type 1 style? So basically, I think she means the assessment. Is there any possible assessment for type 1 style? Because the current assessment favors type 2.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. I think this goes back to the question of environment. Say, for example, if we create a learning environment whereby not only we teach in type 1 styles, but also we assess in type 1 style. What does that supposed to mean? Say, for example, I am a teacher, or as a teacher, give a test full of multiple choice tests. That would probably favor a type 2 style. But then if I also give questions such as using the format of an individual essay, giving the prompt like create something or imagine something, then I would be assessing type 1 style. Yeah, so that's a simple answer. I know the time is short. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please let's have a round of applause for Li-fang.